Ahoy mateys, and welcome to Buccaneers Guild. Last time, we looked at drawing trees together, detailing them and colouring them, shading them. So, let's take a look here, and you can see I've drawn a few more and filled out all the planned spots for trees on my plan. So let's quickly review some of the things I've done before we move on to drawing some mountains and hills. You can see how I've continued with more of the round deciduous trees we did last time, but I've also added some more of these conifer or fir trees. These are drawn with an identical process, first with a black line drawing, then a base colour, some alternate colours and some shading to finish them off. If you didn't see my previous trees video, then it's linked in the description and you should probably watch that first. One important thing to note is that when transitioning between two types of trees, it's very effective to mix in a few differing trees on each side of the border, like I have done here, to visually blend the two groups of trees together. And of course, in the north here, you can have whole forests of firs. So, let's move on to mountains. We'll start here with our plan again. You can see I've revised it a little. Wasn't happy with the earlier plan, just quickly redone it, and that's where I positioned the trees. We'll ignore everything else though, so I've turned off the trees and we have just the plan. With the mountains, we're going to start with a lines layer. If we just sketch out a maximum size that we want mountains to be here whilst we're zoomed out, then we can zoom in and see immediately on this grid that the maximum we'd want to go to is around 2 grid squares, and these grid lines will help us keep our mountains straight. Now, just like when we drew the trees, we want to start at the bottom and work our way upwards or backwards into the scene. So we'll start from the lowest point down here. On the outskirts here, we want a smaller sized mountain. Now, the mountain peak is basically a triangle, so let's keep this one fairly shallow. And as it's at the bottom, we'll draw bottom with 2 simple lines. Next, we'll create some shadow on the left-hand side. A really dark shadow here. With this fill, it gives a very dramatic look to the mountain. We'll finish off our first little mountain with a bit of detailing with these cracking little lines that add some interest and texture. Then, if we zoom out, we'll see a nicely sized crisp mountain. It's time to do some more. So, the second mountain will be slightly behind the first. It still needs a base. Give it a shadow and some cracks. Now, let's draw a third over here. This one will make slightly steeper. We'll sketch out the shadow, fill it in and add the cracks. I find this quite a bit quicker than drawing trees. I guess straight lines are easier than curves for me. Let's now fill to the edge quickly. This one's on the edge, so we don't need to see it all. Now we're on a second line, we don't need bases. So let's have a double peak here, a shadow for each peak and some detail lines. I think we'll fast forward this now. This is important to note though. When you have a shadow like this here that impinges on another mountain bleeding into each other, then it's important to erase a part of that shadow, the width of your line, to show separation between each mountain. And it highlights the peak of the mountain in front. So, that's enough line drawing of mountains now to demonstrate the next stage. I'll do more mountains later without making you watch, but let's now create a layer for some colour and move it underneath the lines layer, just like we did with the trees. I'll pick a suitable purple mountain colour, and we can fill these with the fill tool like this, or, as I prefer, just use a brush and block them in. Once we're all blocked in, we can choose a different colour and add some variety. I'm going to use a new layer for this. Right, so a different bluish colour. You can be quite bold with these colours actually, because we're going to mute them later with some shading that's going over the top. Keep the colours in the blue, violet and purple headed mountains kind of range of colours and keep going. Now, all those colours are done. Let's take a brush that will add some texture, something like Procreate's Signet brush, and we'll use that to add some shading to the mountains to try and break up the flat, bright colours that we've drawn. You could be quite rough here, throw it all over, And when you're done, you can drop the opacity and get the look that you want. Now, with a new layer, we'll add some snowy peaks. We'll go as white as we can and pick out some of the higher looking mountains and give them a beautiful white peak. There we go. That's how our mountains will look. Next, we're going to add some hills. Okay, I've grouped the mountain layers together to move them out of the way. And now, with a new lines layer and my normal Kato pen, we'll put hills on a layer above the mountains layer. Again, we'll work from the bottom upwards, starting down here, and we'll start with some smaller, lower hills and build them up. I'm just using a small bump shape, which you can easily change the height and width of for these hills. Now, unlike trees and mountains, we won't join all these hills together. They work better in little groups of 3 or 4 with some space between them. Sometimes it can be hard to keep these hills looking symmetrical for me. You often end up with a lopsided look like this. So take your time and make sure they're symmetrical. Now, as we've moved further down here, we're a little bit off plan, but I feel like there needs to be more hills in the foothills here, and there wasn't enough brown in the plan. As we work our way up here by the river, we know that we want to wind a river through here, so we deliberately place hills with a gap between them where we can draw our river later. Let's wind this on a bit. Now all the humps are drawn, we'll add some detail shading. You'll remember this from the trees, it's pretty much the same thing, just sketching in little horizontal lines on the left side of each hill, bit of dotty details out here on the edges, and repeat it over and over. Personally, I don't find this requires any patience from me because I enjoy doing it. I find it relaxing, and I'm always looking forward to the finished product. And if you were to make something like this yourself, then I'm sure you and your players would love it when you're done as well. I bet you can guess what's next. Yes, a hills colour layer. And yes, I do spell colour this way, even with my accent. It's an occupational hazard, I'm afraid. But iOS disagrees with me. Okay, well then, we'll find a medium hard airbrush, which I can never find when I want it. Stop screaming at the screen, telling me where it is. Okay, with this medium airbrush, let's fill in the hills. Now I'm using some pressure-based opacity here to fade the bottom of this fill out. Let's fill these in a bit quicker. If you don't have pressure support, you can always just lower the opacity of your brush and then fade it out that way instead. I'm using an iPad Pro here and the amazing Apple Pencil, but you can recreate this look with many other tools and software. You might be using Photoshop and a Wacom style drawing tablet, or you might just be using your fingertip and a smartphone. Either way, you can create the look of this map with the tools you have available to you with a little extra care and effort. And of course, after we've finished our base coat, we can go back and fill in some different, more fun colours with some rusty reds and oranges, browns, and a little green hill here and there. When that's done, we can follow up with some shading, brushing it on the left-hand side like so, all the way up here and finishing off all these hills. Then we can pull back the opacity a bit until we're happy. And there we have our hills done. Thank you very much. So next time we shall take a look at adding some finishing details by adding rivers and lakes, some settlements and roads, and then we'll try naming some things. So, if you've enjoyed this, please take the time to like and subscribe. You could even become one of my first 100 subscribers. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.